Hello and welcome to the Aquarius Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Reed. This episode of the Aquarius Podcast is sponsored by OASE. OASE is well known for their line of outdoor pond and water garden products and are now stepping into the indoor aquatics market. Their lineup includes products like the BioPlus filters and external Biomaster canister filters. Both lines of filtration offer models with heater integration to help you declutter your tank and show off your plants and fish. OASE also has a great selection of aquariums in their Biorb line. Their Biorb Cube aquarium actually won the award for Best Aquarium Product at the Super Zoo Trade Show. So check out these great products and more by clicking on the links in the show notes. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Thursday, June 13th, 2019. My guest today is Frank Amir. Frank is the brand representative and area manager for Sera USA. So Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you for inviting me for the podcast.
Yeah, no, it's going to be an awesome one for sure, and it's going to be a podcast that I'm a little bit ashamed to say I didn't realize how awesome or how involved in your experiences in the hobby have been. So just kind of in the pre-intro section, you and I discussing a little bit more about your backstory, and oh man, there's a lot there. So I'm very, very excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as a disclaimer, so I am Director of Operations for Aquarium Co-op, so you do serve as kind of our representative for Sera for us on that business side, but you and I, we had connected at Aquatic Experience 2018 prior to me joining Aquarium Co-op, and I had reached out to you then, and many other brands as well, and you were one of the few that actually was relatively interested in being interviewed on a podcast to talk about Sera, so thank you for that, and I just felt like throwing that little disclaimer out there for people so they know that, you know, we do have a business relationship, but at the same time, we did make a connection prior to that, and we'll have as much of an unbiased conversation or whatever as we can. So,
sure.
And on that note, so your backstory, right? So I thought I was just going to have you come on to, you know, talk a little bit about the saltwater tank that you said you had at home. Maybe you've had a couple tanks before that, and then, you know, to really spend the bulk of our conversation talking about Sera Foods, which, you know, we'll still definitely talk about Sera Foods because it's quality stuff. But you had told me, so where did you grow up, Frank? Let's just start with that.
So I'm from Kenya, born and raised. I grew up basically in a fish store. You know, typically we would go to school and get picked up at about 4 o'clock, and we'd all drive to the store. And then when my dad closes the shop, that's when we go home. So this, my dad's been in the fish business, I would say, a little over 60 years now. He still has chains back home in Kenya, and that's how my interest basically started. And from freshwater to saltwater, of course, my dad has full-line stores, but fish was, I would say, maybe 70% of the business.
Wow, yeah, and so that store in Kenya, to give a shout out to any podcast listeners that are in East Africa, that are in Kenya in particular, your dad, the chain of stores that we're talking about is Aquapet. Is it Aquapet Kenya or just Aquapet in general?
Just Aquapet.
Okay, just Aquapet. So, yeah. You know, that was a gigantic golden nugget of podcast interview awesomeness that I had no idea that you had that backstory. And for those of us that are not geographic masterminds of East African countries, Kenya actually borders Lake Victoria.
Correct.
And you have some experiences with Lake Victoria.
Yeah, we used to pretty much, it was a short drive, I would say about 45 miles to get there. And every couple of months we would go there camping, and very early in the morning the fishermen would generally bring the catch of the day, and unfortunately at the time we did not realize how expensive they were, but you know, we would generally have haplochromis for lunch, until today this practice still goes on, and there's unidentified species being found pretty much every single day, but sometimes, you know, they do end up coming into the trade, and sometimes they just get eaten up right on the shores there. But yeah, we did go there pretty frequently.
Yeah, and it's such a, you know, the first world, you know, perspective on tropical fish and our appreciation for them and where they come from, their native habitats. But realizing that for locals in these areas, in many cases, you know, these fish that we treasure as, you know, aquatic pets, if you will, are a source of protein, of good protein for locals, and for them to pass up on that, is not really something that they're going to do, nor really should they do, for the sake of like our interests, right? So like, they probably are getting down on unidentified species, and maybe, unfortunately with some other external forces that have been put on Lake Victoria and these other rift lakes, these species are on the decline, but you've got to put food on the table for your family.
We had a big problem with Sylvania and water lettuce covering up the surface of the lake and making navigation very difficult. I haven't checked lately what the situation was, but it was a huge epidemic, and there was a lot of issues with that. I don't know if that's been taken care of or not, but I remember maybe 35, 40 years ago, I remember seeing from a distance the growth of the plants on the surface, making navigation very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as far as timeliness, this episode will be episode 61 with you, Frank. The previous episode 60, which is not published at this point, but will in a couple days, that was with Greg Steves and I. And Greg is a member of the CARES organization, a huge champion for fish conservation, specializes in haplochromides and in Lake Victoria. And he and I had a conversation at the top of one of our hikes in Washington State. It's a real cool place to conduct an interview. But he and I talked a little bit about CARES and conservation in Lake Victoria, or the Rift Lakes in general, and it doesn't sound very optimistic as far as the news that's coming out of these areas. And we actually went so far as to say that when you do talk about it, it's fairly depressing. All of these introduced and external forces that are happening on the lake, or the lakes, I should say. It's just not positive news, and it doesn't sound like there's much positivity to report, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's the reality of it.
Wow. So it sounds like what you're saying is that we need to book a trip back to Kenya. We could stay with your family. You're a local, and we can totally go out to Lake Victoria. Is that what I'm hearing, Frank?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So what are some other stories that I feel like you've got to have like a couple crazy stories from your childhood, Lake Victoria, anything you can dredge up on the spot?
I mean, there's a whole bunch and all different kind of experiences. At the time, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have internet access. I was just fascinated by all the fishermen that would bring some of the fish over to us, to the store to sell. And, we struggled, of course, because we didn't have a market for African cichlids. But, I would probably have to really think deep and hard to find you something that was worth talking about. But I can't think of anything on top of my head right now. Did
you ever have fishermen bringing in like massive fish that there's no way like anybody's actually going to keep in an aquarium, but they're just thinking like, hey, maybe I can sell this fish store these fish? Yeah,
they used to bring us the African lungfish, which were very difficult, and then the catfish, the local, Synodontis nigriventis, which was a very popular fish. And then through these channels, we'd also get fish from West Africa. But unfortunately, they were very specialized. We didn't know much about them. We didn't know how to care for them. So we'd bring them in, struggle for a little bit, and then eventually it all fizzled away. But from freshwater to saltwater fish, this is how the chain was. And of course, they didn't have enough knowledge. Neither did we at the time, how to transport the fish, how to bag them, how to ship them. It was done, we used regular buses to transport fish from one side of the city to the other. And sometimes, some of these rides were as long as 6 to 10 hours with very rough conditions. But as time went by, we improved, and of course today with technology and the experience of actually bringing fish in from the Far East, we would have fish coming in at really odd hours of the night, and I remember as a kid how my dad used to acclimate the fish and all the different techniques that he had, and sometimes we struggled for long periods of time trying to find out what the disease was, what the infection was, why the fish are getting stressed. I remember fish coming into Africa from the Far East. You're looking at very long distances. You're looking at almost 24 to 36 hours, in some cases even longer. So the stress levels are so much higher. The conditions are so much worse. the infections and diseases that you see there are different from when you're shipping fish within an 8 to 10 hour window. The stress level does not bring the similar diseases that you see here that we had then there. And of course, not having sourcing of medication. I still remember acryflavin, potassium permanganate, methylene blue, malachite green, some of which we don't use anymore, but this is what I remember being used at the time. And the experience and that excitement of seeing all this, and then the transitioning of, the survival rate in some batches did extremely well and some didn't. So I think today, of course, we've made great progress in terms of, the survival rate, and I see just overall much healthier, better quality fish. We brought in fish from all the way from Israel, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and most of it also came from Hong Kong.
Oh, nice. Now, would being in Kenya, are your fish able to take, or were they able to take direct flights, or were they having to stop over in one or two different airports before they'd finally end up in Kenya and in your fish store?
They always had at least one, in some cases two stops, and then you have a lot of documentation processes that sometimes the flight lands, and by the time you clear the shipment through the local authorities and bring it to the facility, you're looking at additional maybe 5 or 7 hours at the time. So it would take quite a bit of time.
Yeah. On the one hand, it's the fish that would succumb to the stress and diseases and the things that would come with extended transportation. But at the same time, the survival rate, though, and just how hardy these fish and these animals can potentially be, just the hardiness of shrimp in transport. I'm blown away when I talk to people that do a lot of shrimp shipping, and just how long shrimp can stay in a bag and the temperature fluctuations that they can experience. It's pretty incredible how hardy they are. Now, I'm not advocating that we should, keep them in transportation as long as possible, but it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think when you have fish in bags that are being shipped for longer than 20 hours, the pH drops tremendously. The ammonia, which already is toxic, but because of the pH being very low, the fish actually cannot detect the level of ammonia. But the moment you open that bag up and the CO2 starts to escape, the pH goes up, and that really stresses the fish out. And the trick is just identifying what fish can handle it and for how long, and just doing it over and over again until you perfect the art.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because, to be very clear, as a business owner, there's kind of two driving factors, I would say, to this fish survival. One is, this idea of these are living creatures. We want to take care of them. We don't want to see anything perish unnecessarily and in, unsanitary or in a cruel manner. And then on the other hand, there's the financial aspect, right? Like, you've paid for these fish. You want as high a survival rate as possible so you can have healthy fish to sell to your customers. And, through these iterations and your dad's 60 years of experience and all your time in it, like, you'll inherently become good, and you need to become good because you're a business. And, you also have this driving factor of, it's sad when fish die. Like, we don't want fish to die. Like, we don't want any animals to die in our care or in transportation to us.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most, I would say, a painful moment. Just maybe 10 years ago, I lived in Florida, and I used to import saltwater fish from Africa and Indonesia. And I remember seeing these poor fish sometimes making the whole trip, being collected from the ocean, sent to the wholesaler. Wholesaler bags the fish up, sends it to me into Miami. I pick the fish up, bring it to my warehouse, I acclimate. And sometimes in about 40 minutes, you have a few fish that die. And it was very depressing because we put in so much effort to make all this happen, and for whatever reason, which we did not understand at the time. And of course, as you do it longer, you get better experience at it, and then you can have them survive longer. But it was very, very depressing to see fish dying like that.
Yeah, without a doubt. Going back to Kenya, so the Aquarius in Kenya, the freshwater Aquarius, what would you say would be a pretty typical setup for a Kenyan aquarist?
This has changed over time. It is now more planted tanks. Goldfish, fancy goldfish, and koi also are very big. It would be mostly tropical fish. Whenever I talk to my parents back home, they talk about the exactly what we're doing here. I think shrimp is the only thing that has not yet taken off. It's there in a very small percentage. It's in certain areas only, but mostly planted tanks. Tropical fish is what's the most popular.
Mm-hmm. So from your recollections as a kid, and as growing up in the shop, were the tanks with like the little underwater scuba bubble man and the clam that opens his mouth, like were those decorations and everything? So those are all popular as well.
They used to be popular up until maybe I would say 10 years ago, when that whole transitioned into more live plants, driftwood. Remember, we have a lot of access to all different kinds of rock locally available. You just drive about 30-40 minutes away from the city, out in the wild, and you can pick any kind of rock you want. You can have any kind of driftwood you want. So it was easy access. And of course, that has taken hold right now, and I hear more and more people getting into the planted setups.
Mm-hmm. So then, even though it's over in East Africa, the mirroring of aquarium tastes and styles to, say, the United States, it's not that far off then, as far as how it's progressed, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not. No.
Oh, very cool. All right, now before we move on to Sera, Frank, do you have any like crazy zebra or elephant or lion stories or anything like that? I feel like you've got to, right?
Well, where we lived, we were just maybe 30 minutes away from the airport. If you left very early in the morning, I would say maybe 5 in the morning, as soon as you drove off the house onto the main road, that early, you would get to see giraffes, zebras, once in a while elephants. And twice we've had a cheetah in our backyard, and a couple of baboons that used to hang out in our backyard sometimes. But of course,
that's awesome.
We've had some issues, and had to call the local authorities to come and use I don't know what they call it. They actually
like a tranquilizer
and then take it back into the wild. But yeah, this was very common. Of course, we had Jackson's chameleons that were very common there. And, Kenya is the only country that has a national park within the city. So you could be around high-rise buildings, and as you're driving, drive right into a national park that is protected within the city. And when you drive out on the other side, you're back around high-rise buildings.
And this is in Nairobi?
This is in Nairobi, which is the capital, yes.
And what's the name of the park? Because I'm on Google Maps right now. Is this the Uhuru Park, or?
No, Uhuru Park is more of a regular...
Nairobi National Park?
Nairobi National Park, yes.
Okay, and it's right southeast of the airport. Looks like it's just right over A104, yes. if that's the designation for that freeway.
Correct.
Wow. And how long did you live in Kenya then? How long did you grow up for in there?
I was there for 30 years.
30 years, wow. So
there. My father is also born there. My mother is born in a small island called Zanzibar, which is on the east coast, again, of Africa. And I was born there, and I moved to the U.S. In 2001.
Wow. And so what was your perspective? Like, clearly you are an educated person, and just the fact that I had no idea that you had this experience living in Kenya. What was, growing up there for 30 years, what were some of your impressions like when you came to the United States? What were things that are so common to us that you found to be just utterly shocking? Like seeing giraffes crossing the street would be pretty shocking to me. What was something that really, kind of threw you off coming to America?
Actually, I had traveled quite a bit before coming to the U.S. I think the saltwater aspect of it was always very, very impressive. I remember in 2001 as I came in and I moved to Florida and visiting the local stores there, it was just amazing to see the depth and level of the saltwater hobby and how intense it was. This is something we didn't have. We generally looked at South Africa being a neighbor to East Africa, and that's where they were pretty much advanced, and they still are till today very advanced in aquatics and several other fields. But I found the saltwater side of the hobby extremely intense in the U.S. than I think any other part of the world.
I like your use of the word intense when I do have conversations with saltwater folks, and we talk about their setup, and we talk, anything about, corals or whatever it may be. It always feels very intense. The expense, the cost, the velvet wipeout, and just everything that comes along with saltwater. It's intense. And when people are like, "Are you ever going to do a saltwater setup, for yourself?" It's like, no, because it sounds so intense.
Having said that, even though the saltwater was more interesting, more advanced, I'm always drawn towards freshwater. I think there's something very serene about freshwater. I find saltwater, yes, it's nice and pretty, it's very colorful, but I think the freshwater tanks, the planted tanks, are absolutely breathtaking. I still, when I visit stores, I'm always drawn to a freshwater setup with some discus and tropical fish, or biotopes of fish coming from specific areas. I'm always naturally drawn to that. And there's something about it that's very calming and relaxing. And one day, when I'm not traveling as much, generally I'm on the road about maybe 25 days a month. So I have 5 days when I come home. It's too short a time to really enjoy a fish tank. But eventually, maybe when I have a little more time, I would love to have a few more tanks that I can set up. But back home, and I didn't answer this question when you asked me earlier, I think I must have had at least maybe 12 tanks just within the house. Some just random, assortment fish, anything that we found that was interesting and unique would end up in some of those tanks. But once I moved here, I've had a few tanks here and there in the last maybe 15, 16 years, but nothing that serious.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely do have some serious street cred and credentials in this hobby. And I'm glad that you brought up that, as a brand rep, what you do for a living, you travel so much, and 25 days a month of travel is incredible. And you are also a family man. You have a home. You've got kids. And so, for me personally, thank you so much for dedicating, up to an hour of your time on, when you're at home to talk to me and to share your story and about Sera with my audience. So thank you for that. But one of the nice things, I guess, with all the travel though, and kind of what you do, is that you just get to immerse yourself so much in the hobby. And I've seen you a couple times now at various trade shows. And so, when you're not manning the booth, which is the majority of the time, you get to walk around and see kind of the setups and so I'm sure you've had your opportunity to see some pretty sweet tanks and pretty cool setups out there.
I have, and I think what I'm really hungry for is sharing knowledge and experiences. I just still today find it extremely fascinating how stores get into the retail side of it, and how they started what they did, and how they solved some of the problems that they go through on a daily basis. And this is limitless. This is something you cannot read online, and first-hand experience is pretty much very golden. And till today, I always look forward to going to stores and seeing what they've done different, and very inspiring also.
It's going to be a sad day when I don't get excited to go into a new fish store.
Yes.
Like, even I don't want to say this in too negative of a way, but even a Petco and a PetSmart, and I'm bringing them up because they're typically very cookie cutter. You go into a PetSmart, Petco, they're pretty much going to be set up the same way. And say what you will about their care practices, one of the things with social media, if you do any like fish social media stuff, it's very clickbaity. Like, oh, I'm gonna make something about Petco PetSmart in a very negative light. That's my headline, and then I'm gonna get clicks. But yeah, I mean, going into a PetSmart or Petco, even though you have an expectation of what you're going to see and it's probably going to be fulfilled, it's still exciting to go into a city that you've never been to before, and you go into that PetSmart or Petco. And you go and look at their fish. It's something that, it's going to be real sad when I'm not when I pass by a fish store that I've never been into, and I'm like, nah, let's just keep driving.
Yeah. I think I've been to, I would say maybe 35, 36 different states, visiting most of the stores in the area. I still am always excited walking into a store that I've never walked into. I walk in and I think I'm more excited by a sponge filter that I see that I haven't seen before, if that's something that would ever happen. But I like the old stuff. I like the old type of filters. I like the old school systems of doing things, and most of that I think it's the person behind it. I want to know how they put everything together. I look at the smaller details. Presentation, yes, does matter to a certain extent, but more towards the health of the fish and the planning and the layout is probably one of the most exciting things.
So I'm interested to know, have you been to Ocean Aquarium then in San Francisco?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so what is your impression of Justin's shop in Ocean Aquariums?
I think it's
crazy. It's interesting. Yeah. I love that store.
Yeah, it's one of those in the top 10.
Yeah, it is. Well, because you brought up organization, and there really is no organization in that store. It's chaotic, but it's amazing. It's this, hobbyist gone wild. It's a crazy, crazy store.
It's actually this is and every time I see something like this, I always question why one store has the ability to do well, and just a few blocks down the road there's another store that's struggling to do well, and I'm constantly questioning myself why. How can someone improve their business? What is it that they're doing different? I find it amazing always when I see more than one owner in a store. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 partners, and how they integrate and make it work. So it's very, very interesting, and I always look forward to learning more about them.
Yeah, I don't want to call out the particular name of if we're talking about Ocean Aquarium and then maybe one of the other stores in San Francisco. I think one of the things that hopefully is helping out Ocean Aquarium is potentially maybe the low overhead carrying costs of goods. So you walk into that store and all of those plants, I assume he's propagating them. Sure, he's probably getting his livestock deliveries once a week, but I know he does a lot of breeding as well of those fish. But I think aside from the fixed cost of utilities and rent, I don't think there's much else going on in there that he's having to expend money on, where I think some of these other stores that I've been into, maybe we're thinking of the same one that's also in San Francisco, but they have, every brand under the sun and every SKU for that brand. It seems like it's just, food choice overload. There's like 30 different choices of algae wafers in 15 different sizes. Like it's an incredible amount of money that you end up sinking into those products. And I know you as a brand rep, like that's not necessarily the conversation we want to have. No. But I think an inability to down select and really carry some choice consumer dry goods, I think you can just end up, sucking up all of your free cash flow and just have it be in every single dry good possible, because you don't want to lose that one fringe sale.
This is something we experience all the time. Sometimes you just have too wide a selection. The customer is actually inundated. They have 30 different choices. You're right. And a lot of times it's confusing. If you had to read up on nutrition on fish food, if you go through about 20 different articles, you will not know what to go for. It's just too complicated. It has to be simple. It has to be straightforward. And when you're going into a specialty store, it's the owner's job to educate. I have 1, 2, and 3. This is my best, and this is, price conscious. And that's all it has to be. But when you give so many choices, it's very difficult to keep up with it.
Well, and there's also lot expirations, right, that you have to worry about with these with dry goods, with liquids, with meds. I think for the most part, in this hobby of what we carry, I think our shortest shelf life product might be 12 months, which is, 12 months is that's a pretty decent shelf life. I feel like some foods can push 2 to 3 years on their shelf life. But I have been into stores, and I challenge people to do this. Like any listener out there, when you go into your local fish store or your big box store that has a massive selection of aquatic foods or any other food, maybe like turtle foods or reptile foods, whatever it is, go through and pick up like 2 or 3 random, food assortments and look at the expiration date. Because without fail, when I go into a store that has a very large SKU selection of foods, I will find 1 or 2 foods that are expired.
Yes, I would say maybe more than half the stores struggle with this. Your average shelf life, yes, about 12 months. Touching on manufacturing and expiration dates, most foods generally are produced in bulk and then stored in a warehouse. At Sera, we don't do that. We actually produce food when an order comes in. So when Sera USA places an order with Sera Germany, that's when it goes into production. When Sera Spain orders, it goes into production. So if you look at our facilities online, there's a few videos out there. All the products that you see moving within that facility are all spoken for. So nothing sits in a warehouse. Whatever comes into the US has just been made maybe 2 or 3 weeks before being delivered to the US, so it's very fresh. It's not been sitting in warehouses for long. I would say by the time the product gets here and goes to the store, you're looking at maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 months, give or take, which gives you at least 2.5 years of shelf life.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so that's going to be a make-to-order model for those manufacturing geeks out there. That's make-to-order as opposed to a make-to-stock model.
That's how you can have consistency of quality and make sure that you have the longest shelf life possible for the product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, Frank, if you didn't already know, like, feel free to, you can turn this into as much of an infomercial for Sera as possible.
Sure.
My whole goal with this podcast is to give, there's so many voices out there in this hobby, and it's not just all conservation and fish breeders and specialists of
Sure.
flower horns. It's also for the manufacturers too, for
Sure.
you that represent Sera to come on and tell Sera's story. So people that listen to this podcast that may not know about Sera as a brand, this is a way for them to learn more. And the same thing with if I ever get somebody from Hikari or New Life Spectrum or whoever the brand is. Sure. I've had Fritz on before.
Yep.
To come on and just talk about your brand, talk about your product, and geek out on fish nerd stuff, because the
Sure.
fish are awesome, but we have to be able to feed them.
Sure.
And we're not all going to make beef heart mixes in our Cuisinart.
Yeah. Well, so I've been selling Sera now, I would say just under 30 years. So my father is also a distributor for Sera in East Africa. We import mostly everything. All our fish food comes from Germany. We have a lot of stuff that comes from China, and we retail that within the chain of within the chains, and then of course we wholesale some of it to Tanzania and Uganda. And so my involvement with Sera has been, going back maybe just under 30 years ago. I remember bringing the product in and selling it in a third world country where, people were not quality conscious. But I still remember till today, they would come back, some of the customers would come back with empty containers, and, we would give them other brands of food, and they would say, no, we want only the yellow can. And this stuck in my mind, why is it that, the customers keep on coming back for this yellow can? They didn't know what was in it. They were not told to come back for this, but for some reason they always were drawn back, and they said there's something about this food. And this is something I've experienced till today. Palatability of fish food. When you give any fish the Sera food, the chances of them eating it are north of 95%. In most cases, you give fish new food, it takes 3 or 5 days for them to get adjusted to it. So technically, they would take a couple bites, spit the food out, the food settles down. The next day, you do the same, and then on the 5th day, they have no choice but to eat it. But there was something about the Sera fish flake that I, till today, haven't found any other food that can be so easily accepted instantly. And this is all the way from freshwater to saltwater. I've tried this on fish that have never had a flake or a pellet. And sure enough, you try the ONIP or some of our staple foods, and straight away they'll go for it. I remember this one video you guys did with the archer fish. With the ONIP tablets.
That video is awesome.
That was a phenomenal video. And you know, when you see things like this, and then of course you go back and test, and I've tried and tested all other foods. We're not saying anything is bad. I actually, even though I work for Sera technically, I still think that you have to give fish a variety. You should also give them other brands of food, because you have different sources of ingredients that are being used, and there's no way you can have only one food exclusively that has everything fish needs. So you have to give them a variety and other brands as well.
Yeah, and that's actually I've had Dr. Ashley Emanuel. So she was at Aquatic Experience. That's where I met her. I'm not sure if you've interacted with her or not, but she's North Carolina's first certified aquatic vet, and she came on to talk about fish nutrition. And you know, the gist of the conversation was, one, we don't know enough about fish gut biome and fish nutrition intake as we do dogs and cats from a pet perspective. With that being said, you know, the work that companies like Hikari and Sera and these other large brands have done on fish nutrition, it's good stuff, right? Like, don't necessarily get caught into buzzwords that we may look for in our human food supply chain, but also feed a variety too. And because we don't know that much, it's good to feed a variety to your fish so that they are getting different nutrients and different foods into their diet for their overall health. And you know, that was something I was already doing, but I really appreciated hearing that, and it made me feel good. It's like, oh man, a vet said that I should keep doing what I'm doing, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely true. We don't know enough. What we know is just very little. I'll tell you about one of our lead scientists that works at Sera. His name is Dieter Untergasser. If you go into primary source material for discus diseases, he wrote a few books on that, on discus health and nutrition. He has 250,000 fingerlings at his house, and all he does is research. So he'll get a batch of food made, sent over to the house, and he'll feed the fish 3 or 4 times a day. And then every other day, take the fish out, put it on a scale, weigh, take a blood sample, and see how the ratios of protein to vitamin affects the fish in terms of growth, disease resistance, including fertility. And then he documents all this, and that's how fish food comes into being, by using those ratios of proteins to vitamins. And he's been doing this for the last maybe 30 years for Sera, and he's one of the full-time employees.
Wow, that is awesome. Does he have any of his books translated into English, or are they all in German? Or
no, he does have. He also does seminars all over the world in nutrition, including fish disease.
Okay, and his name was Dieter
Untergasser.
Dieter Untergasser. That just that name alone makes him sound like a genius.
Yeah, he's a fun guy to talk to.
And you said he had 25,000 or 250,000 fingerlings?
250,000 fingerlings. This is where he does some of his research.
Wow.
I think some of the videos that he's done, or some of the slideshows that he's done, also show part of his setup where he's had all this fish. And he's there generally at every show. I think last year at Innerzoo in Germany, he was there. And a very technical guy, very knowledgeable, and with a lot of experience.
Wow, that sounds incredible. Have you had a chance to go see his facility or his home, I guess I should say?
Not yet. Unfortunately, he lives totally on the other direction from where the facility is, and when we go to Interzoo, that's another 5 or 7 hours away, and it's just been not had enough time to coordinate.
Gotcha.
And like this happened. But every time we go for Interzoo, I get a chance to talk to him, and sometimes I have to listen very carefully because it's so technical that I actually understand what he talked about 2 weeks after.
Yeah, you have to kind of marinate on it a little bit and let it sink in.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible, though. But Sera has somebody on staff that's been doing fish nutrition research for 30 years. That's incredible. Like, feeds the fish, weighs them, takes blood samples, is constantly testing foods. That's incredible.
And he is just one of our guys. We actually have 11 full-time scientists. All they do is research on product.
Wow.
From medication, unfortunately, we don't have the medications coming into the USA yet. But all they do is just research on product, palatability, sustainability, digestibility, what it does to the water chemistry, long-term, short-term effects. And this goes, of course, into formulations. We don't use any soy products in any of our fish foods, as we now know that soy actually contains a higher estrogen level, which will make fish infertile. So you will never see any kind of soy being used in any of our fish foods. We do not use any kind of protein derived from land animals. From what we have researched over the years, we feel that fish have not evolved to digest proteins that come from land animals. So whatever you'll see in protein ratios in all of our food formulations is all from aquatic strains. So you'll see things like mussel, krill, shrimp, gammarus. These are some of the ingredients that we've always used. And I would say maybe 90% of everything you see in our ingredient listing is what we've used 40 years ago. So we've added a few things, but we've not really taken anything away. And we've seen maximum digestibility, whereby fish can actually consume the food and digest it by up to 85%, which technically means cleaner water, and fish actually being able to transfer this nutrition into body weight without causing any long-term effects, such as stunted growth, and also long strands of fish waste. This actually tells you that the fish are not able to digest the food, and hence they're having this issue. So this is something you'll never see with Sera. I personally have never come across any fish that struggles with digestion when fed, the Sera fish food.
So a couple things there. I definitely want to talk about the fecal matter. Would that be the waste, the length of the waste? But Dr. Ashley Emanuel also, that was one of the things we talked about, was land animal proteins, and how that, the research is showing that, that's something that we should not be feeding to our fish, that they're not able to properly process that. And it's so funny that the beef heart is can be such a staple, and something that people include in their like Oscar cichlid or larger cichlid diet, is this land animal protein, and to hear her say that, right, again, she's done a tremendous amount of research as a certified aquatic vet, and now to hear that Sera and all of the scientists that you have and the research that you guys have done, it's also saying, hey, probably research is saying that we probably shouldn't be using land animal protein. And I know that that's going to be something that, as people listen to this, and maybe they're currently feeding like a beef heart food to their fish, that's where their personal experiences, they're probably going to butt up against those statements, and maybe push back a little bit and kind of flame me a little bit. But when you have this kind of evidence and research coming out, it's not that difficult to switch from, right? Like, we're not pigeonholed into only using beef heart food. Like, there's so many other foods out there that are going to be insect-based proteins or aquatic protein sources, like this, it's almost like the sky's the limit for the number of choices that you have out there that don't contain a land animal. So, if you haven't already done that, like I would personally just, consider switching, take what Frank is saying, the research that Sarah's done, what past guest, Dr. Ashley Emanuel, what she says, and, maybe consider switching your fish off of a land animal protein.
So I'll give you another example of nutrition. I would say maybe about 2 years ago, I bumped into some article done by a lady in Gainesville, Florida, and she was doing research, and she actually took African cichlids and had a local fish food company prepare foods with different percentages of protein, and I think most of these were all haplochromis. And she fed them for, I would say, maybe 6 months, and she documented everything. And from the start to the finish, her conclusion was that African cichlids, if they have a protein less than 35% and higher than 42%, they will not be able to digest the food. And sure enough, when I go into our fish food label on African cichlids, we have a product called Granu Green. The protein ratio was 36.9%. It was very, very specific. And this was 35 years ago, but the research that I read was just a couple years ago. So when these two things match, it tells me something. And of course, African cichlids, there's tons of food. Of course, they'll eat pretty much anything. Fish will eat anything. You just give them enough time and they will eat anything. Going back to the protein used from land animals, oxheart was used. I still remember my father preparing this many, many years ago and feeding it. And it took a while for him to realize and understand, yes, you can use all these things, but it also means you're going to be doing a water change every other day. And of course, as a hobbyist, you want something that's cleaner and more sustainable. We don't know what hormones are being used. We don't know what is being sprayed on the grass that these animals are consuming. So how cleaner of an ingredient can we use to make the fish food more sustainable and accessible? So you mentioned earlier about using insect protein. This is one of the newer researches where we're finding that the protein derived from black soldier fly is more digestible and cleaner in the environment. And of course, the emissions from shipping fish meal from one end to the other, these are all things that we want to consider. So not only do we have a good sourcing for products that are very digestible and very clean, but we also want to be sustainable. And this is something, if you go on our website, you'll see we have our own, we produce our own electricity to run our whole facility. And whatever surplus we have, we supply to just under 500 homes within the area of where the Sera headquarters are.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I would say black soldier fly, the black soldier fly larva, that protein source. I mean, we're probably going to be eating black soldier fly burgers in the next 20 years. I mean, it's just all the research just shows that it's such an incredible source of protein. Its ability to convert essentially waste into digestible, good, healthy proteins is just incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
On the note of the length of the excrement, like the poo, right, coming from the fish.
Yes.
So by naked eye observation, is it something where you should never really see any trail regardless of length whatsoever? Or is it like, oh no, you'll see like up to 1 millimeter or 2, and then your fish will essentially pass that? Like what is kind of the direction to a home hobbyist of what they should be looking for?
You should not have a long trail.
What would you define as a long trail?
Anywhere from 2 or 3 inches is a very long trail. Generally, it should break off.
That's a super long trail.
Yeah, it should break off instantly without it dangling. Fish, it should not be there. When you look at a fish, it should not have any excrement on the body. It should literally break off instantly.
Okay, gotcha. Good to know. And then lastly, I would say, so to kind of share my, 3 favorite Sera foods. And I'm cheating because I have your Sera catalog. Well, I've had your Sera catalog for quite some time, but in my fish room right now, the foods that I feed, Vipin Nature Flake. I love that flake food. I feed the GVG mix. I love that, and also O-Nips, and so those are 3 staples. Now I also feed Vibra-Bites. I've got some Cobalt Flake. I've got Fluval Bug Bite. So I've got a variety of foods in my fish room. I've even got some that I got from past guest Sarah Bills. She has it's like discus food made in Germany, so it's like a real niche kind of brand. But I also have their food. I've got a ton of foods in my fish room, but 3 absolute staples in there are those 3: GVG mix, O-Nip tabs, and Vipin Nature.
And this is the key, is to have this selection, keep on alternating, use different brands. Like I said earlier, it's always healthier and better for the fish because every company uses a different source of protein. Again, when we look at protein, this is a wide subject. Generally, the average hobbyist would look at the percentage of protein and then judge the food based on that. I think, in my opinion, the right question to ask is, what is the source of this protein? Where does this protein originate from? If you have protein that's derived from soy, if it's coming in from a fish digest, or if it's coming in from land animals, it could be a very high percentage of protein. But as we now understand in no fish nutrition, that they're not able to digest it.
Mm-hmm.
So source is extremely critical to ask.
Yeah.
Rather than the percentage of protein.
Yeah. So I'm also going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit, and
Sure.
It's not too much on the spot because I've actually asked you this before as like legitimately, like as this question for if customers ask us. Vipin. What does the Vipin mean in the Vipin line?
It's just a fantasy name.
So it's just a made up name to make it sound cool.
Yeah.
It's a little product branding, so no worries there.
The only thing that I know of, which is an abbreviation for freeze vacuum dried, is GVG.
Yeah, and that was the next question. Yeah, so GVG.
Yeah, flora, of course, just means green. I know some of the names are technical. They're just made up names, and really have no meaning. By the way, when we talk about freeze-dried, I don't know if I'd ever mentioned this to you before, but if you go back into the history of how Sera started, the owner, Mr. Ravnek, actually started this company by collecting mosquito larvae from the local rivers and lakes in Germany and then taking it to fish stores to sell. And as this process went on, he did well, and then he figured maybe there should be a way of freeze drying these animals. And of course, when you go back 50 years, the technology was not there, but this whole process of freeze drying fish food was originally developed and started by Mr. Ravnek. So anytime you're seeing a freeze dried product, this was originally created by Mr. Ravnek.
Wow, that's a cool fun fact. Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on the note of mosquito larvae, I recently, about a month ago, I would say, I harvested mosquito larvae from the side of my house because like any good fish room, multiple tank syndrome aquarist, you probably have some busted tanks on the side of your house that are still good enough to accumulate rainwater.
Yep.
And so I let them sit there for so long, and I went one day and I checked, and they were just filled with mosquito larvae. So my wife doesn't know that, and she doesn't listen to this podcast, so she has no idea that I was just letting mosquitoes breed like crazy on the side of our house. But I harvested so much of that mosquito larvae, and I put them in with angelfish, with guppies. They went bonkers for those mosquito larvae. It was incredible.
Now, this is probably one of the best foods you can use. This and what is it called? We use this ingredient. It's probably one of the most common used live foods in Asia. Actually, most of the fish that come from Asia are fed exclusively on
mosquito larvae, or
it's it grows in green water.
Oh, Daphnia.
Daphnia.
Mm-hmm.
Daphnia. This is one of the most widely used fish foods, and it contains such a high amount of roughage and fiber that it constantly purges the the belly of the fish, and this in turn makes it very easy for the fish to absorb nutrition and transfer it into body weight.
Oh, wow.
Feeding Daphnia is very, very beneficial.
Yeah, if a fish farm is doing it, that's a pretty good indicator of kind of the path that you should be going down as a home aquarist. Like if a fish farm is doing it, there may be something there.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, Franklin, with that being said, we are approaching the 1 hour mark, and like we've said earlier, 25 days on the road. You've only got 5 days at home with your family, so I don't want to take up any more of that precious time. This has been a phenomenal interview, phenomenal conversation with you, and I think you'll be up in our area, in the next week or so?
Yeah, I'm actually leaving for Virginia tomorrow, and then just there for a couple of days, and then I should be coming into Seattle.
All right, well, let's do lunch.
That'll be great. I'll let you know as soon as I land Seattle.
Sounds good, Frank.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the invite.